Welcome to EFT Nation, your home for all things tapping. For show notes and resources, please visit EFTtappingtraining.com. We are your tapping hosts. I'm Alina Frank.
And I'm Craig Wiener. The information provided in this podcast is not a substitute for counseling or medical advice. The information presented here is meant to inspire and educate listeners, but are not guarantees of any kind.
Welcome, and today we thought that we would cover something that we are passionate about teaching and sharing, and that is trauma-informed EFT. Like right now in the media, you're seeing all kinds of like celebrities and sports figures coming out with their ACE score, their adverse childhood experiences score.
There's a big media blitz right now, multi-million-dollar with, on big billboards around, what's your score?
Right.
Oprah Winfrey's work with Bruce Perry in the book of What Happened to You. I mean, it's really everywhere. And, I think it's hard to be doing EFT as a practitioner, as a trained practitioner.
Yes.
Without being aware
Sure.
of the impact of trauma on people's lives. I just want to make one distinction, though. I think it's hard for anybody to be doing EFT without being trauma aware that, that people have trauma in their lives, aware what trauma is, aware that it has an impact. But I'd really like to make the distinction in my mind of the difference between being trauma aware and trauma informed.
Right.
Right. So when we look at what's referred to as TIC or trauma-informed care or trauma-informed TIP, trauma-informed practices, that means that you're not only aware of what trauma is, you understand it, but you're actually actively taking steps.
Right.
Whether it's, we're talking about healthcare, not as far as trauma-informed practices within the work setting or school setting so much. There's a whole different body of work of how a community and a business might be implementing trauma-informed practices. But in our work as EFT practitioners, trauma-informed care is the working with people in safe and judicious ways in which our understanding of how trauma impacts them impacts how we're working in the protocols for how we're working with the client.
Right, and that's what we want to get into. I also want to say that this episode is also for people that are working on themselves or people that are looking for a trauma-informed practitioner, so that you realize what you don't know. It's come to light what it is that you're. Even as a practitioner, the things that you don't know can be really dangerous. So we're hoping to enlighten and elevate the profession and teach about what trauma-informed is. So there are some interesting definitions out there by many different organizations. And let's go through this one, which is safety, choice, collaboration, trustworthiness, and empowerment. So safety first. Right? And safety is all about you as the practitioner knowing what the heck you're doing. So learning as much as you can about trauma. And, I send people all the time to take tapping out of trauma. It's actually required in our EFT certification program. So safety, it's a matter of you working within your wheelhouse, understanding the signs, and being as safe a practitioner using distancing techniques when appropriate.
So can't you just say EFT is safe?
Well, depends on how it's applied, when it's applied, the technique that's applied for any given situation. Is it the first session that you're having with the client or the fifth session that you're having with the client?
Yeah. So there's a lot to that.
Right.
In other words, we see people all the time, maybe following some YouTubes or something. And we all know that so many of our habits and patterns and limiting life views come from childhood.
Yes.
From when the brain is developing and forming our worldview. So does it make sense, when we get to the root of a problem, especially that began in early childhood adversity trauma, to work with those events and those times? Absolutely.
Yes.
But you have to get there slowly and gently and establish plenty of safety and rapport with a client before you get there. You don't dive in the first session saying, when's the first time that you ever got hit?
Right.
When's the first time you ever felt la la la?
Or the worst.
Or the worst time that you felt that.
Right.
That's not a trauma-informed practice.
Right.
It's diving into the deep end when you don't know if the person really has the ability to swim or not.
Exactly. And that goes to the second one, which is choice. So you, as the practitioner, need to be selective about who you're working with, what you're working with, when you're working on it. And so that's choice. The next one.
Well, hold on. Choice, is choice also only up to the practitioner?
No.
Oh.
No.
So how about choice of the
How about giving your client a
Yeah.
choice on whether it's important, whether it's relevant? Because we hear, one of the complaints that I hear is my EFT practitioner took me through the muck and the gore of my childhood, and I still have the problem that I'm dealing with in present life. Because they decided to chase a rabbit.
Right.
Right.
And in a client-centered model approach.
Which is the next one, collaboration.
Okay, well, hold on a second. I just want to say that choice, and then you can get to that.
Yeah.
The choice is that here's the caveat, is a client might say, yes, I want to dive into the deep end now.
Yes.
And going back to number one, safety, as a practitioner, we may say, thank you. And that's so important, and that, I herald your courage, and we're going to get there, but not yet.
Right.
Right. So we're going to kind of be that seeing eye dog that says, no, we're not going to cross in the middle of the street. We're going to get to the corner and wait till the light turns green and establish safety, connection, and rapport first.
Right.
So choice is important. Now, collaboration is this working together.
Yes.
Right. And it's about explaining to your client. This is where trauma information and the ability to educate your client about the difference and the distinction and the power of trauma as opposed to any other memory.
Right.
Right, is important, and collaborating with them to have a plan, collaborating with them to know where you're going to go and when you're not, having them have signs to be able to feel comfortable for when they say, I don't know if I'm ready to go there. Collaborating is all that interpersonal neurobiology that we're watching and observing how a client's doing and making sure that they're staying regulated as much as possible. It's a collaborative partnership.
Right. Next is trustworthiness.
Wow. Boy, that's huge. But that goes into so many elements, from confidentiality,
right,
to the safety we've been talking about,
right,
to the pacing,
to using your client's words and not inserting anything that you're projecting onto them, to giving them the authority and the agency to say, I don't want to do that. And if you've worked in this client-centered model, the trauma-informed model of EFT that we're advocating, that's just a given. But things like your practitioner's not gonna just throw something out of left field and hammer you or try to lead you in a certain direction just because they feel that it's part of what you need, for example.
Yeah, what's so important about this, and in each of these elements, is somebody that's experienced some to a lot of trauma. All of these elements become, these are important with everybody.
Yes.
But especially somebody that's been the recipient of a lot of trauma. The ability to establish trust and trustworthiness does not come easily or fast.
No.
The idea of a collaborative approach is something where, they may have been, victimized, you can debate that word, but in other words, the recipient of trauma. And so all of the ability to a survivor of trauma. So empowering them with choice, empowering them with a collaborative that, they're as important in the process as you are, establishing over time trust in this relationship. All of these things are so important, but don't necessarily come fast or easy.
Right. And I also think trustworthiness goes to marketing and sales tactics and like a bait and switch kind of thing where you might be telling your client, I'm going to do, one session with you. And then at the end say, well, you really need a lot more because we brought up all this trauma.
Or about promises.
Yeah, about promises.
Or any kind of guarantees or even insinuated guarantees.
Yes.
As far as how long it's going to take to resolve
Exactly.
some particular trauma or traumatic childhood, right?
And you might think that that's going to get you more sales. Let me tell you, it's not. People can smell it a mile away. They want someone that's trustworthy enough to say, and knows the process well enough to be honest.
Yeah, that trust gets established as you're able to work with a client that's experienced trauma. Gently, you put your foot in, your toe in the water.
Right.
You come back out. Oh, I'm okay. Then you
Right.
go a little bit deeper. That
Right.
trust gets established over time. One of the things that I love my partner in Tapping Out of Trauma, Suzanne Fagel, says is when working with trauma, you only go as fast as the slowest part of them feel safe going. Right? So in other words, we need to work with a pace that's different than a client that hasn't had a lot of trauma.
But what about the client that says they want to go there?
Well, that's what I was saying before. You have to be the guide dog.
Yes.
And you have to be able to monitor them. And if they're going too fast, you may have to slow them down or back out. Absolutely.
So recent, present, future are always safer than going to way past, way digging into, coming up with timelines of all your traumas and things like that is not trauma informed.
Right. Just to clarify what you just said,
Yeah.
when working specifically with somebody,
Yes.
and it's a new client,
Yeah.
and you've discovered, and maybe we'll talk about that, how you find that out, but you know that there's a history of, let's say, significant childhood trauma, that
Right.
you're going to start off with looking at how is that affecting them now?
Yes.
How does it affect their anticipation or anxiety about it happening again?
Yes.
When was a recent episode that felt like or experience that somehow reminded them? So within a recent window, recent past or into the future, is a safer, gentler place to begin than diving into the quagmire of the past traumatic events.
Okay. So there's also empowerment. Empowerment is all about giving your client choices, on giving them the tool. I mean, I can't imagine that a practitioner would be out there and not teach their clients EFT.
Teach them how to do EFT on the trauma?
No, how to do
Oh.
EFT on their own so that they can
Okay.
work on not the traumas, and teaching them the difference between here's what we don't want you to work on by yourself and here are the things that you can work on by yourself.
And we keep talking about trauma, but we really haven't defined it in any way. And, when we start, there are many different definitions, but when we start to look at the role of adverse experiences to the individual, whether it's singular, one time, acute, or repetitive over time, there are elements in which it affects one's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. It has ongoing lingering effects long after the event.
Right.
It often is of an unexpected and dramatic nature. When those adverse events happen, they feel isolating, where somebody feels alone and helpless and without the ability to overcome the situation.
Right.
And so there's a sense of powerlessness. And the lingering effects of trauma, boy, they affect your worldview. They have, you look at any of the ACEs studies, and there's so many that show the role that's directly connected between early childhood trauma and addiction and chronic health, from heart disease and liver disease and earlier death to, so many different ways in which trauma affects one's life, one's ability to excel, one's ability to have a relationship, one's ability to hold a job and be able to really feel good about oneself. All of the things that we're so commonly working with EFT.
Right. One of the acronyms that we like for trauma is UDIN. Unexpected, dramatic, isolating, no resources. And that's for all traumas, big and small. And you do need to educate yourself about what is the difference. And so, knowing that will empower your client because they want to be involved in their own healing as well. Telling them where to go, where it's safe to go, where it's not safe to go.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing is that when we look especially at childhood trauma through an adult's perspective,
Yes, very different.
it's very different. It's like, well, that wasn't such a big deal,
Sure.
right? Lots of people have had it worse. But when you look through the eyes and mindset of a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old, it feels absolutely overwhelming. Like, I'm going to die. I'm never going to make it through this.
Right.
And to the brain body of that little one.
Yeah, for sure. And it still lives within you.
Exactly.
Okay, so the other interesting kind of definition for, which is easy to remember, trauma informed. Let's go through the 4 R's. So the first R is realization. So realization is, wow, I realize and I've educated myself enough to know that certain groups of people and ethnicities and race might have some trauma to deal with. So it's not only realization, oh, I'm dealing with trauma because what they're presenting, but I'm realizing that all these different populations can be absolutely dealing with even generational trauma.
Yeah, I mean, the community, everything from the family one was born into, and what kind of community,
Yes,
and what kind of demographics one lived in, and what was the community like as far as resources to food and safety and violence. I mean, so many of those things.
Yes.
So starting educating yourselves about higher likelihood of different people and different demographics being more likely to have higher levels of trauma. But again, it can be anybody and everybody. Let's be honest about that.
The next R is recognizing, and we're talking about recognizing the signs. And so this is what we really recommend if you are a practitioner, is to do a discovery session with a client before you do any tapping with them. Before actually doing a tapping in a session, you're going to do a process where you're going to recognize, oh, gee, I better ask more questions, right? To identify whether this person has high ACEs, whether they're stable enough to work with me. Do I need to collaborate with their therapist? What is my scope? So all of that is too much right in the middle of a session, a tapping session. So we really recommend doing a full discovery session with any new client.
Yeah, I always, in my discovery session, I'm careful because I'm not a licensed mental health care therapist.
Yes.
So I can't ask every person appropriately,
No.
have you had suicidal tendencies? Are you seeing a therapist?
Or
what medical conditions have you had? What traumas?
Exactly.
Right? That could absolutely overwhelm somebody.
So you're recognizing the signs of when you do need to ask certain questions.
Exactly. And then starting to ask specific questions about, what might stop you from being able to achieve that and step forward in that. Have there been things in the past in which you learned that you might not be able to do that?
Right.
Were there places where you may have made decisions that limited you? So that kind of inquiry that's very specific to a client but gentle. And in a discovery session too, because we're not doing tapping, if I'm being led in the direction that I actually want to know somebody's ACE score,
Yes.
one of the things that I'll do is I will read the question aloud and then simply ask,
Yes or
not
no.
for details, not to tell me the story, but did you experience that, emotional abuse before the age of 18? Did you experience any, we go through the 10 ACE scores.
Right.
And just simply yes or no. So when we start looking at ACE scores of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Yes.
that has to impact my ability to start to either ask more questions, consider collaborative or referral care. All of those things come into play in my mind in being a safe practitioner.
Right. So this also goes to the next R, which is respond. So you're responding to the trauma appropriately at the right time. And so that is might be difficult for someone that does not understand enough about trauma and wants to go for the jugular. And I am guilty of that. When I first started EFT, we did not have enough trauma education to know that it was not appropriate to be comfortable. Oh, this one is really hard. Comfortable with stopping a client from telling you their trauma history or telling you a specific traumatic event in detail, because really that leads to the next R, which is resisting re-traumatization.
So couldn't you say, if you were really honest,
Yeah.
that when you began your EFT practice,
Yeah.
that you simply weren't trauma informed?
No, I wasn't trauma educated. I was not trauma informed.
And hence you
Yeah.
went deeply quickly.
Exactly.
And you can do that, and sometimes people are fine. And people
Yes.
can say, hey, my clients are doing great.
Yes.
But you know what? The ones that often we re-trigger, they just choose often to not directly confront the practitioner and say that was
never.
uncomfortable.
Never.
They get too busy.
Or
For their next
I
session,
can't afford
or
it.
they run out of funds, and
Yes.
then they end up going to another practitioner and telling the story
Maybe.
of what happened.
Maybe. Or they'll never try EFT again because their experience was so hard. So since I became trauma educated and trauma informed, all the years I did work with clients, it was rare for anyone to say they were feeling dysregulated, they were feeling some physical symptoms after a session, all that. And for me, that was real validation that I was able to then pick up on early signs that things were happening, subtle cues that my client was giving me, and my own understanding of, don't go there. I know you heard it. Tell them to stop saying it and talking about it, and tell them that you write it down and you'll bring it up later when it's appropriate. So things like that. And so I think with all of these, so let's repeat the R's: realization, recognizing, responding, and resisting re-traumatization. And I think what the message here is educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself. Yeah.
And then educate yourself and then put into practice.
Yes.
And educate your clients.
Absolutely.
Because when they start to understand.
Yes.
Anybody that has lived through significant trauma often thinks that I should be able to deal with this. Right. I should be able to move on with this. This shouldn't be this shouldn't be bothering me or affecting me the way that it is.
Right.
And when we teach them about the way how the way that the brain works, and how, especially when we're young and the brain and neurosystems are developing, that we become kind of walking on eggshells, that we become hypersensitive, that we become hyper-aware. Many people even start to look at themselves as being a highly sensitive person.
Right.
Because they've learned to be on acute alert all the time, because the body learns it's all about survival, right? So if it learns that I have to be on hyper alert to survive different situations, then that's the way I just start to live and think that's my normal. And there's so many things like that people are living with a history of trauma, that really can reach tremendous resolution and healing when working with a safe and effective practitioner.
Mm-hmm. So 2 courses that we do that I really think that if you're an EFT practitioner, you really should check out. It is part of your education for how to work safely and with trauma, and even a discovery session might be new to you. So one is the Art of Delivery, which we do every summer. Art of Delivery really unpacks each of the techniques, goes into which ones are distancing techniques, which ones bring them closer. We analyze why we do what we do in techniques like box container. Mm-hmm. So,
and for finding practitioners,
yes.
So different resources. So one is people that have completed Tapping Out of Trauma. We have a practitioner directory.
Yes.
At tappingoutoftrauma.com for people that have completed 1, if not 2 levels of trauma training.
Yep.
Right.
Or you can ask us. We have plenty of people that have gone through our certification that we recommend for all different kinds of issues. And they had to complete Tapping Out of Trauma in order to be certified by us. All right. Great discussion.
Thanks for joining us today at EFT Nation. And remember that you can find show notes and previous episodes at EFTtappingtraining.com.